Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. We have the incredible privilege of having Amy Ganz, founder of Ames and Olives catering business. I almost said charcuterie business, but that's not, you do more than that.
Yes. Yeah, you can.
It is a charcuterie business. It's her cheese biz, as she calls it. And she is phenomenal at it.
Oh,
But the reason that we have Amy on the podcast today is because we are continuing the series on shame. And this episode is all about really overcoming shame in the area of infidelity, adultery, brokenness in marriage. And so it is a heavy topic. So we may break it up with some laughter kind of throughout because Amy's hilarious and that's what she
I'll
does.
do it.
Um, but it's going to be powerful because Amy, your story and how you've chosen to walk out this journey with your boys and with your now ex-husband, it has not been without blood, sweat, and tears, but you've really chosen a high road in this process. And I think really helping people to see that there is a way through, there is a way out, and that it doesn't have to mean that you stay broken. It doesn't have to mean
Right.
that everything is falling apart forever. And so I just want to give you permission to share whatever you feel comfortable sharing with. I know that I have several listeners that are going to just be so blessed by your story.
We all want to see each other through. And some of those women in there were really fighting for reconciliation. Some of them were in the process of the divorce. And so to be able to sit with those women and to like contend with them in whatever decision they felt was right for them,
Right.
like was some of the most healing months in my life. Because real it's hard because really no one talks enough about the courage and the bravery that it takes to stay
Mhm.
um, after somebody has been horrible to you. And then like no one also, I feel like I'm not no one, but a lot of people also don't talk about the courage and bravery that it takes to leave.
Right.
And so it was the first group that I felt like I was a part of where it's like none of us are we're not making decisions for one another. We're like we're just here with you day by day. We're just here
Right.
to help your nervous system like
To regulate again. Right.
regulate and to be okay. And like if you need to scream and cry and throw something, like great, awesome. Like and if you like whatever. And so it was just kind of the most like it was the safest place that I could be, where people felt like they could be 100%
Right.
truthful and honest about their journey and their struggle, because there really is so much shame that comes upon you when you talk about like the feelings that you have in your um in your journey to heal. Because
Right.
I was becoming a person I didn't know that I could be. I was like, wow, I didn't know that I could be like this unhinged. I didn't know that
Yeah.
I could have ever experienced like I mean anger is healthy, but like I was we're you
We're
let
at rage
days where
now. Yep.
rage, we're at rage, and you can't talk about we don't talk
No.
about rage in the church because rage is not a fruit of the
Rage
spirit.
is bad. Rage is bad. And if it's there, then there's something
It's
wrong with
bad,
you. Yeah. But
right?
it does it, but here's the thing. When we experience a level of loss on the
Yeah,
earth that we were never created to experience, we
right.
will feel emotions that we were never created to feel.
100%.
And that is why, and I just kind of took some notes on like some keys that I feel like you kind of dropped in there. So for the listeners that are like hearing your story and they're like, whoa, 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 this is amazing, like just how you walked through that, is that being validated in community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And having a safe place to process the emotions and know that it's not that people are saying, hey, Amy, you're going to camp out and rage for the rest of your life, because you had already made that choice. I'm
Yeah.
not going to stay here. But
Right.
in order to not stay there, we have to feel everything that we don't want to
Everything.
feel,
Yep.
everything,
Everything.
including the emotions that we don't like, including the emotions that make us feel bad about ourselves, And otherwise it's gonna come out in some other kind of way, like physical illness or chronic
Yes.
illness or mental illness, like all of that stuff. This is why developing that community, if you can't find it in your church, if you cannot find it in your relationships, this is where those support groups can become extremely helpful.
Yeah.
um, and one of the things I kind of picked up on when you were talking is the idea of really sharing the weight of
Hmm.
the shame that you were walking through, and like allowing others to help you to like hold up that burden, right? Because it's like it was put on you. It was not something you did yourself. It was not something you asked for. It's
Right.
something that came on you because of the experience that you had to walk through. And in order to heal from that, we have to allow other people to come alongside and really give voice to like almost like mirror for you what you're feeling, and help to co-regulate with you,
Yeah.
because when something that traumatic happens, we have to co-regulate with somebody.
Yep.
Like it's God never created us, I don't believe, to be able to fix that on our own. And so I mean, I know there is so much more in that story, and you're not sugarcoating it at all in terms of what you had to walk through to
Yeah.
to heal. And I think, one of the things that I think you've made really clear, like, just in our conversations, but also in this episode, is I want to kind of talk about it just a little bit more, is the idea of like, I'm not going to slander him. I'm not going to share all the nitty gritty details. I'm not going to, just because it might provide me temporary relief,
Right.
that's not what's going to heal me. And there's so much wisdom in that, because I grew up with an emotionally abusive parent,
Mm.
that she was very dysregulated all the time. And so the shame that I experienced was a different kind of shame, but it was very much this idea of, if I talk about it,
Yeah.
I'm like, there's just this weird thing, like
Yep.
weird belief thing, that it's like, if I talk about it, I'm slandering them.
Right.
If I do that, I'm defaming them. But there has to be a place to tell your story, otherwise you don't heal. And so
Right.
I think for you, like what you honed in on was really finding those safe places
Yeah.
to share your story, so that you didn't have to like go on social media and blast him, or like call
Right.
up all of those women and be like, lots of bad words for you, lady,
Yeah. Thought
like
about it.
all. Oh yeah, I am sure, and I think Jesus was right there like, "Yep, I get it. I feel ya, sister, but we're gonna hold on tight to that to that honor." So,
Yeah.
I'm sure that added a whole other level of juggling for you,
Yeah.
um, in how to navigate that, because it's not, even in your anger and even in your rage, it's like the heart of you is not wanting harm for them. You just want relief from your pain. And so
Right.
it's finding a safe avenue, I think, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but finding a safe avenue um for that pain, so that it's coming out in a healthy way, so that you don't have to step into like retaliation or
Right.
bitterness.
Right. Yeah. No, it really is a hard line to walk. The tension of wanting to share parts of your stories, especially as you heal and you become whole again. I mean, because that in itself is like is a miracle, really. And I never ended up, my story did end in divorce, and just remember thinking like, man, I never got the reconciliation. I never got the restoration, kind of that miracle that I had hoped for in my marriage. But to experience it in my own life, I think was equally as celebratory. To experience restoration and like in my own life was a testament to itself. And so because I wanted to share that, because I now felt like I wanted to share the healing like tools that I had that that were given to me, either just kind of in my own, I don't know, self revelations, or through therapy or through community or whatever, I felt like as I began to heal slowly, that I recognized where the tide was turning. I remember there was a point a couple years ago. I mean, would tell people would ask me how I'm doing, and they just go, how are you doing? And I think for like 3 years, I was only ever able to say, okay, I'm okay,
Mhm.
And I remember the first time I just blurted out, and somebody said, how are you doing? I've been thinking about you. I said, I'm good. And I like shocked myself because I was like, am I good? Am I, have we, have we arrived here? And I remember this person saying, you probably never thought you were going to say that, did you? You probably
Mhm.
always thought you were going to say, you're
Wow.
just okay. You're only ever surviving. And I think that that's where, when you become, it's hard to say, yeah, when you become a survivor of this, because really you are an abuse survivor. Like
Right.
you are you are now in this category, which is difficult to talk about and to sit. I remember a therapist saying, you are in a category of survivors. Like infidelity is marital abuse. And to
Mhm.
now be an abuse survivor and to now sit in support groups with other survivors, you're like, oh, well, now I'm the statistic.
Right.
But for the longest time, you actually only feel like you're only going to survive. Like this is it. Like, and especially as you co-parent, or especially if you're doing it alone, like it really becomes the only world that for what feels like an eternity. It's like we're just surviving. We are just, I mean, we're literally every day waking up and hoping for the best.
Right.
People ask me all the time, like, how do you co-parent or single parent with three boys, and run your own business? And I think everybody wants like this profound
Right.
like
Magical
advice.
answer. Yeah.
I literally just say no. I wake up and we hope for the best, like because we have only known how to survive for so long. And so when the tide kind of turned and I kind of just blurted out like,
I'm
I'm
good.
good,
Mhm.
I realized I actually, that was the most honest thing that I could say in probably 4 years. Like, I am okay. And it was this like revelation for me to be like, you've made it. Like,
Mm.
I mean, I think there's a part of me that always feels like I'm going to be healing in some way,
Right.
but to know that I had kind of come out of the fire and I'd come out like even more refined and more resilient and more like, this didn't end me. Like, if anything, this kind of birthed this new, like, I don't know, resilient, like, for,
Strong,
yeah, like this
healthy person.
fortress. Yeah, that just now that I'm good, like, we just refuse to be reckoned with. And so to arrive there was so like incredible and miraculous for me. And so I wanted to be able to share parts of my story because I had really sort of arrived in a place where I can walk in healing and freedom. And so I wanted to give those tools to other people. So to get back to what you're asking, how do you do that appropriately with somebody that you still really care about and that you love? And I love this person as the father of my children. And I think because of the person that I am, I want everyone healed and I want them
Right.
whole. I want them, like, everyone loves a good comeback story.
Right.
Everyone loves somebody that turned their life around, and like you can leave your children a legacy if you want to. And so that's always been my hope, for him.
Right.
And so, but to know that I also feel the kind of this calling, I should say, to want to share um my story of like, hey, there's real redemption here. There's real, like, I've turned a corner. Like, I'm not going, like, my story, it doesn't end here. These were chapters,
Yes.
but the story isn't over. So how do I tell women the same thing? Like, how do I get this message to them without it sounding like I'm dragging this person through the mud, or I have all this bitterness or hatred? Like, I definitely did in the beginning. Like, I
Right.
mean, you're you're
How do you
the way
not? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the ways that like your mind and heart are like so disassociated in trauma, I was like, oh no, you feel kind of just borderline crazy forever.
Mhm.
And as you begin to get you get
Right.
better, like, I hated who I was becoming when I was bitter. I remember feeling it. I was full of it. I mean,
Mhm.
we made jokes in our support group that I was like, "Do you have bail money? And I will bail you out if you like." We
Yep.
were just
Yeah.
like,
Right. It's real.
you know, and I remember hating how I felt
Yeah.
and the toll that it took on me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, honestly, the most. It wore my body down. I hated how I felt. And I just remember crying to a friend because I was like, I hate being this person. And I don't know this version of me and I don't want to be this version. Like,
Right.
I know that I am better than this and I know that like my kids deserve better and so it was a hard couple of years of figuring out how do I share stories of grief and trauma and triumph
Right.
without having to give out so many details, and
Right.
people love the tea.
Yep.
We love gossip, we love details. People would message me personally and just be like, "Hey, well, we just want to know what happened." And then other people have messaged me and said, like, "Hey, we noticed, he's maybe not in your photos anymore." It's
Right.
so people get really bold, but either way, there was like you can't hide it, especially when
Right.
you're showing up alone. And so I wanted to be able to share my story in a way that was still honoring to my
Right.
family. And yes,
Absolutely.
is it broken? Was it a broken unit? Yes. But I felt like there were ways that I can still write about pain and I can still share about grief, um, and overcoming because, like, I really wanted that so badly for other women who have
Absolutely.
also walked through this and who also feel so desperately alone.
Absolutely. And so
That's
what would you say, I mean, because you've taken the hard road, right? You've committed to your healing and you've committed to like those core values of you and to your family, which is just, it takes so much courage. Like you were saying, either way you choose in this process, it takes courage, right? So, what would you say to maybe somebody that's listening that's, at any point in their process where they're realizing like shame is still very much like a prominent piece of
Mm,
my story? Where are some avenues that you might point them to get help?
that is a great question. Yeah, I mean, getting help obviously is the first step. I had to submit myself really to a lot of processes and things. I knew that I had to aggressively go after it. So I mean, I sat my butt down in therapy for 3 years,
Mhm.
both in family counseling and then in trauma therapy. Um, I would say like, I mean, because really shame is so isolating because you feel that first sense of like humiliation and then there's just so many like voices that come in. I would just say, shame really is that like inner critic that's so loud that like it points and it laughs and it tells you that you failed. You have failed. And so I felt shame the most when I felt like I now have a failed marriage, and now like and especially in the church, like I mean we that's a whole different conversation for another
Right?
day. Like
Mhm.
recognizing that like, the evangelical world is leading the world or we're beating the secular world in divorce rates. And so to
Yep.
have that kind of linging over my head of like I'm now a
With
contributor
those.
to this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
or I have failed. And then really at the end of the day it's like I took on that inner voice, that critic that was like, well, this is also probably your fault.
Mhm.
And if you were, fill in the blank, if you were prettier, if you were, smarter, if you were this, if you were better, if you were a better wife, if you were all of these things, if you were this person, it's like we take on so much responsibility, like on ourselves. Like we put on this like unnecessary pressure that somehow like
Mhm.
not only did this now happen to us, we carry the shame of this is our story, but now that we also carry like there's so many layers, right? Of well, I probably I caused this, and so I think really because the first piece is that it's so isolating and like it really isn't the narrative, and it's, it's
Right.
such an ugly thing to walk out and to walk through, you
Right.
know? It's like,
Absolutely.
people don't, I think, heap a lot of shame on, as many other stories of survival as really kind of as they do on this, because
Right.
it's so messy and scandalous, and like there's just so many pieces involved, and and it affects everyone, especially with divorce, and especially when there's children. Like, the body count is just everywhere,
Right.
and it's overwhelming, and it's a lot of the reasons a lot of people don't see themselves through to the end, and
Right.
they can't get the help that they need, and because it is so overwhelming that you kind of just freeze. I my body went to kind of fight, flight, freeze. I forget the order, but
Yeah. Yep.
it stay
You
there.
went through all of them. Yep.
Yeah, we're all of them. And so it's like, if I could encourage anyone who has lived through this, if this is their experience now, like, to know that this is there are so many there are resources available. I didn't know this at the time. I had no one. Like, I remember calling someone and saying, "Who do you know that has survived this? Who do you know that, like, they understand the pain of this? I don't have to say very much for them to understand." And I remember this
Yeah.
person saying, "I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone that's lived through this. I maybe can connect you with this person in another state or whatever." Um, and so, but now knowing the resources that I have now, like, to be able to, I think, kind of break free from that, like, really first, the shame of, like, those, that inner critic, like, to know that you don't actually have to walk through this alone, that
Yes.
there are people that will get their hands dirty with you. They really
Right.
will. That was like one of the most surprising, redemptive things that happened to me, that people, like, they sat with me.
Yep.
They didn't rush me to be in some milestone in my grief that I should have been. Like,
Right.
they just sat with me, they got their hands dirty, they held space for every emotion that I had. They held, like, they were a wall
Wow.
I could slam into. And to know that there are people out there like that, was, I mean, really the best thing that could happen. And so I want to encourage women that there are this is available to them. Like, they don't have to sit in the shame that somehow they are a failure, or that because
Right.
they have a failed marriage, that that is also who they are. Like, this doesn't have to be this full blown, like, attack on their identity, or that they somehow have failed
Right.
as a person. I see my Yeah, I think so much of the world sees divorce as failure, and for me, I got really healed from shame when I saw it as freedom.
Mhm.
That the exit that was provided to me was God's mercy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Like, exit was mercy. Um, and it's a different narrative that we take on in the church. It's
Right.
not one you hear the most about. We put a lot of emphasis and this focus on the finality of divorce, of like,
Mhm.
oh, well, they just gave up. There's a lot of misconceptions around the subject of divorce, and we can talk about that all day, but those are just other things that I had to really get free from, that I
Right.
felt shame of,
Wow.
over kind of under this umbrella of, like, failure. And
Absolutely.
it wasn't until I saw it as mercy, and it wasn't until I saw it as freedom, like, and it's funny because even after my separation, I lost my job. So this is all
Mm.
in 2019. So I literally lost everything.
Mhm.
And I remember sitting in the DHS office, like, I'm now a single mother, like, single co-parent, now on welfare,
Mhm.
walking through hell. And I remember sitting in my car, like, getting my food stamp cards and just bawling my eyes out,
Yeah.
but, like, also not caring. I didn't care anymore because I was free.
Mhm.
I was free. And it's like I had
Wow.
lost everything and my world had completely blown up around me. And I just didn't care anymore because I was like, I feel free.
Right.
Like when the veil of abuse was lifted for me, I was like, I was walking in mercy and I was walking in freedom. And so I want women to know that, like, they can reach out to people, like, there are safe people, like, because when this happens to you, like, part of the shame, the judgment that comes on yourself is that, like, you kind of have a lot of, for me, I had some self-hatred because I was like, I can't trust myself. I
Right.
didn't s- I now no longer can trust my inner, like, the inner voice, I don't have discernment, like,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so it's just this
Right.
compounded layers of shame. And so it's like you feel like you can't trust yourself. And so then if you feel like you can't trust yourself, you can't trust anybody else. And so
Right.
this is why the majority of a lot of women that walk through these stories of like secrecy and infidelity don't feel like they can reach out to anybody, is
Right.
because they feel like the world will betray them too.
Absolutely.
And um and so I want women to know that, like, that really is just kind of the voice of shame. Like, that's actually, it's not truth. Like,
Right.
there are so many amazing people. Like, the gift to me were all these left fielders and all the people that I didn't expect
Mhm.
um to find me, and
Right.
to just like to sit with me and to know that like my anger and rage didn't scare them.
Right.
It didn't
Yes.
push it didn't push them away when I thought it should have, you
Right.
know. And to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to allow people to see the most, like, the ugliest parts of yourself,
Right.
um, that was that was I can't even describe it. Was so healing to know that there were people available to me that
Right.
saw me like that and
Right.
loved me still, and
Mhm.
loved me through. Um, so that was, yeah, that's kind of that long-winded.
No, it's so good, and I think it's that you touched on it earlier, but it's that, like, we all need Jesus with clothes on, right?
Right.
Like, especially when you lose a primary relationship like that, like, we need so much more support around us, and I love all of the keys that you shared in here because you're not just sharing about the pain and the yuck and the hard, and all of a sudden it becomes really heavy, right? For
Right.
somebody who's listening to it, you're sharing like this is how you walk through it. There is a way out. And um I love how you dug your heels in on that. And I know that it wasn't easy. And I know that it was a daily choice and a surrender and a fight and, all of the things in there. But I just want to say thank you for sharing your story,
Oh no.
because I know that there are people listening, that are going to find hope, maybe for the first time, that
Sure.
their ending doesn't have to look like the tape that's playing in their head, right? Or like divorce is the only end, or
Yeah.
all of the stories that float around when we're walking through pain. So I just want to thank you, Amy, for taking the time today to be brave and share. And you did such a beautiful job of walking that tension of owning your story but not stepping into like exposing all the things
Sure.
that aren't, that it's not really necessary even for where you are right now. So thank you
Yeah.
for taking the time to be on with us today.
Thanks for having me. This was
Absolutely.